Darkness, silence, and the sound of water dripping from jagged stone. On a humid summer evening in 1975, three friends, boys barely out of their teenage years, ventured into the mouth of a cave hidden deep in the wilderness of Kentucky. They carried nothing more than flashlights, ropes, and the reckless confidence of youth. What started as an innocent adventure would end as one of the most haunting mysteries the region has ever known. Hours later, only one of them emerged, his clothes torn, his face pale, his body trembling with fear. He refused to speak of what happened inside. The town was left stunned. Where were the other two? How could three go in and only one return? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered about a cave-in. Others spoke of wild animals lurking in the dark. But soon, far stranger theories took root. Whispers of cult activity, hidden chambers, and something ancient waiting beneath the earth. The survivor never told the full story, at least not at first. Police, desperate for answers, questioned him again and again. But his account was fragmented, broken. He spoke of screams echoing through the cavern, of lights that weren't from their flashlights, of a presence that followed them, step by step, deeper into the abyss. The bodies of the other two were never found. No evidence, no traces, just silence. Decades later, the cave remained sealed off, abandoned and feared by locals who still warn their children never to go near. But the question remains, what really happened that night in 1975? Was it a tragic accident? A crime born of fear and desperation? Or did the three friends uncover something far more sinister? Something that was never meant to be found? This is the story of three friends who entered a cave in 1975, and only one came back. And tonight, we're going back inside. To understand what happened that night in 1975, we must first step back into the lives of the three friends who entered the cave. They were young, restless, and bound by a shared love of adventure. But beneath the surface, each carried secrets, flaws, and motivations that would later haunt the investigation. The first was Daniel Harper, the lone survivor. At 19 years old, Daniel was known in his small Kentucky town as a quiet, thoughtful boy. He wasn't the leader of the group, but he was the one people trusted. He worked part-time at his uncle's hardware store, saving money for college. Neighbors described him as responsible, reliable, the kind of boy who walked old women across the street. But friends knew another side of him. Daniel had a hunger for exploration. He often pushed himself and others into dangerous situations, chasing thrills to feel alive. That summer, he had become obsessed with local legends of caves scattered through the hills, some mapped, others forgotten. Then there was Mike Lawson, 20 years old and the oldest of the three. Mike was the adventurous soul, the ringleader who never turned down a dare. Tall, athletic, with a grin that drew people in, he carried himself with the reckless charm of someone who thought he was invincible. He'd been a high school football player, popular with classmates, but after graduation, he found himself drifting. While others planned for college or steady jobs, Mike bounced from one idea to another, searching for meaning. The cave expedition was his idea. For him, it wasn't just about exploring. It was about proving himself, about being remembered for something bigger than small-town life. Finally, there was Ethan Cole, 18 years old, the youngest. Ethan was shy, bookish, often teased for being the quiet one. But what he lacked in confidence, he made up for with knowledge. He had an almost obsessive fascination with geology and folklore. He'd spend hours reading about the underground systems beneath Kentucky, about myths of hidden passageways and strange disappearances linked to caves. Some said Ethan knew more about the terrain than any local guide. And yet, despite his intelligence, he followed Mike's lead. He wanted to belong, to prove to himself and to his friends that he wasn't just the timid boy with his nose in a book. Together, they were inseparable. Each balanced the other. Mike's boldness, Daniel's steadiness, Ethan's curiosity. For years, they'd roamed the forests, camped under the stars, and dared each other to go further, climb higher, risk more. By 1975, their friendship had become something almost unshakable. But there were cracks forming. That summer, whispers spread through town about disagreements between Mike and Daniel. Some said Daniel grew frustrated with Mike's constant recklessness. Others hinted at a girl caught in the middle, someone they both cared for. Ethan, always caught between the two, struggled to keep the peace. No one knew how deep these tensions ran until the night of the cave. The cave itself was infamous in local stories. Hidden in a remote valley, it was rumored to have endless tunnels and a dangerous underground river. Farmers spoke of strange noises echoing from its depths. Teenagers dared each other to go near, but never stayed long. To Mike, it was irresistible. To Ethan, it was a puzzle. To Daniel, it was a risk he didn't want, but couldn't walk away from. On July 12, 1975, as the sun dipped low and cicadas buzzed in the trees, the three friends made their choice. They packed flashlights, ropes, canteens, and a sense of invincibility. They laughed as they walked toward the cave's mouth, unaware that only one of them would ever return. 3 boys, 3 stories, 1 cave, and the beginning of a nightmare that still leaves more questions than answers. The cave lay hidden at the edge of a valley thick with overgrowth, its entrance little more than a jagged crack in the hillside. To most, it looked like nothing, just another dark slit in the rock, swallowed by vines and shadow. But to Mike, Daniel, and Ethan, it looked like a challenge. It was around 6:30 p.m. on July 12, 1975, when the boys arrived at the site. The last rays of sunlight stretched long across the ground as they set down their packs. No one else was with them. No one saw them cross the threshold. Their last recorded moment together was when a nearby farmer spotted them from a distance, flashlights in hand, stepping into the darkness. From that point forward, the truth becomes tangled in fragments. What Daniel claimed later, what investigators pieced together, and what remains speculation. Inside, the cave was narrow at first. A single file passage with jagged stone pressing in on either side. The air was damp, heavy, filled with the faint smell of moss and decay. Their boots scraped against loose gravel, echoing down the tunnels. At points, the boys had to crouch, squeezing through tight bends, their flashlight beams bouncing against stone walls. According to Daniel, things started out fine. They laughed. They joked. Mike teased Ethan for stumbling over a rock, while Ethan rattled off facts about stalactites and underground rivers. But after 20 minutes, the mood shifted. The air grew colder. The sounds of dripping water grew louder, almost rhythmic. The tunnels widened, opening into a chamber where strange markings, natural or otherwise, etched across the walls. This is where Daniel's story fractured. He later told police that the group argued. Mike wanted to push deeper. Ethan hesitated, suggesting they mark their path to avoid getting lost. Daniel sided with Ethan, but Mike mocked them both, insisting they were overthinking it. Voices rose. Flashlights swung across the chamber. And then something else. Daniel claimed he heard a sound. Not dripping water, not shifting rocks. A sound like footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from deeper in the cave. Mike laughed it off, but Ethan froze. Daniel remembered the way Ethan's face drained of color, his flashlight beam trembling as he pointed it toward the darkness. "We're not alone," Ethan whispered. From there, Daniel's account becomes disjointed. He described sudden panic, Ethan stumbling as if pulled backward, his screams swallowed by the cavern. Mike rushed into the dark after him, flashlight beam vanishing in seconds. Daniel followed. At least he thought he did, until his own light flickered and cut out. Silence. Then echoes of shouting. Then nothing. Hours later, Daniel emerged alone, his clothes smeared with mud, his skin scraped raw. When locals found him wandering near the valley, he was incoherent, muttering about screams and shadows. His flashlight was missing. His rope was frayed, and his friends, Mike and Ethan, were gone. When investigators entered the cave days later, they expected to find signs of a collapse, an accident, perhaps even bodies. Instead, they found nothing. No rocks dislodged, no blood, no abandoned gear, just a stretch of tunnels that went on for miles before narrowing into impassable squeezes. One detail stood out. Deep within the first chamber, etched into the stone, investigators noted markings, sharp, unnatural lines that resembled symbols. Ethan's parents insisted he hadn't made them. Locals swore they hadn't been there before. Daniel refused to look at them. Search teams combed the area for weeks. They drained sections of the underground stream. They lowered ropes into pits. They brought in dogs. Yet not a single trace of Mike or Ethan was ever discovered. No footprints, no fabric, no bones. It was as if the cave had swallowed them whole. The disappearance shocked the town. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some insisted Daniel had turned on his friends in anger, hiding their bodies where no one could reach them. Others whispered about the cave itself, that it was cursed, that something ancient lived inside, something that didn't let intruders leave. What remained undeniable was this. 3 entered. 1 returned, and the cave, silent and unyielding, kept its secrets. The disappearance of Michael Lawson and Ethan Cole quickly escalated from a local concern to a countywide emergency. In small towns, news travels fast, and within 24 hours, nearly everyone in the surrounding area had heard about the boys lost in the cave. At first, locals assumed it was a simple accident, an all-too-common story in Kentucky, where sprawling underground systems had claimed careless explorers before. But the more investigators dug into the details, the less sense it made. Sheriff James Holloway was the first official to respond. A veteran lawman in his 50s, Holloway was pragmatic, known for cutting through hysteria with calm efficiency. When Daniel Harper stumbled back into town late that night, disoriented and trembling, Holloway was called immediately. The boy's story, fragmented, erratic, full of contradictions, was enough to unsettle even a seasoned sheriff. Daniel insisted there had been something else in the cave with them. At times, he described hearing footsteps. At others, he swore he saw lights that weren't from their flashlights. And when pressed about what happened to Mike and Ethan, he broke down entirely, muttering through tears. They screamed, and then they were just gone. The sheriff wanted clarity, but all he got was confusion. The following morning, Holloway organized a search party. Dozens of volunteers from town, along with state troopers and experienced spelunkers, converged on the valley. Equipped with ropes, lanterns, and climbing gear, they entered the cave system in shifts. What they found was frustratingly ordinary. Narrow passages, chambers of dripping stalactites, pools of water reflecting pale light. No signs of collapse, no clothing scraps, no blood. Even footprints were scarce, quickly erased by damp soil and flowing water. The search stretched on for days. Teams marked the walls with chalk, mapped every reachable tunnel, and pushed deeper than the boys were believed to have gone. But time and again, they emerged empty-handed. For the community, hope dwindled. For investigators, suspicion grew. The longer Mike and Ethan remained missing, the more attention turned to Daniel, the sole survivor. To the public, his story sounded unbelievable. How could he make it out unscathed, while his 2 friends vanished without a trace? Why was his flashlight missing? Why was his rope frayed? Rumors ran wild. Some townsfolk speculated that Daniel and Mike's alleged rivalry over a girl had boiled over into violence. Others whispered that Daniel panicked in the dark, leaving his friends behind. Sheriff Holloway pressed Daniel for details in repeated interviews. Each time, Daniel's account shifted slightly. Sometimes he insisted he saw Ethan pulled backward into the dark. Other times, he claimed Mike had run after him, never to return. When asked whether he himself had panicked and fled, Daniel grew defensive, his voice cracking as he shouted, "I didn't leave them." But with no bodies, no evidence, and no crime scene, the sheriff had nothing concrete to hold against him. Still, the investigation turned up a handful of unsettling clues. On the 3rd day of searching, spelunkers discovered the strange markings carved into the walls of the first chamber. Sharp, unnatural lines forming crude symbols. They didn't resemble initials or graffiti. Some said they looked like arrows pointing deeper into the cave. Others thought they were ritualistic, almost like runes. Photographs were taken, but experts could not identify their origin. Ethan's parents swore their son, fascinated as he was with geology, would never vandalize the cave. Daniel, when shown the photographs, refused to look, shaking his head violently, as though even the sight unsettled him. Another peculiar detail emerged. Several searchers reported hearing odd echoes while underground, sounds that didn't match their movements. A rock clattering when no one had stepped. A faint whistle of wind in chambers where no airflow existed. Though likely explained by acoustics, the eerie atmosphere fueled speculation that something unnatural lurked below. By the second week, the official story hardened. Mike and Ethan had likely gotten lost deeper in the system, perhaps swept into an underground river or trapped in a passage too tight to reach. Authorities concluded they were presumed dead. On July 23rd, the search was called off. The cave was sealed with a metal gate, officially deemed too dangerous for future exploration. But for the town, closure never came. Too many unanswered questions lingered. Why had Daniel survived? Why were there no remains? And what about those strange symbols? For the families, grief turned quickly into division. Ethan's parents remained close with Daniel, convinced he had done all he could to save their son. They described Daniel as traumatized, a boy who would never fully recover. But Mike's family saw things differently. His father, Harold Lawson, was outspoken in his suspicion. "That boy knows more than he's saying," Harold told reporters. "My son didn't just vanish. Something happened in that cave, and Daniel Harper's hiding it." The community split down the middle. Some defended Daniel as a victim of a tragic accident. Others quietly accused him of being a killer who outsmarted the sheriff. And through it all, Daniel himself withdrew. He stopped working at his uncle's hardware store. He rarely left his house. When he did, children whispered and pointed. Adults fell silent as he passed. In a town that thrived on gossip, Daniel became the center of a story no one could let go. By the end of summer, the case had gone cold. Officially, it was marked as a tragic accident. Unofficially, it remained one of the most debated mysteries in the county's history. No bodies, no evidence, no resolution, just a cave, sealed and silent, and a survivor whose haunted eyes suggested he had seen something in the dark he could never put into words. And yet, the investigation was far from over, because what seemed at first like a straightforward tragedy would soon twist into something far stranger. When the official search was called off, many assumed the mystery of the cave would fade into memory. A tragedy, nothing more. But small towns don't forget so easily. With no bodies to bury, no definitive answers, and a survivor whose story seemed riddled with holes, suspicion began to grow like ivy. Soon, Daniel Harper wasn't the only name whispered in the shadows. The most obvious suspect was Daniel himself. Some townsfolk believed his survival was too convenient. If the boys had gotten lost, why didn't he? If they had fallen into a pit or been swept away by underground water, why wasn't he pulled in two? And what about the frayed rope he carried out of the cave? Sheriff Holloway tried to follow this lead, but he had no hard evidence. Daniel's injuries, scrapes, cuts, bruises, were consistent with someone navigating a cave in panic, not necessarily with violence. His clothes were torn, but not stained with blood. And while his story changed slightly each time, trauma could explain the inconsistencies. Still, rumors persisted. Some claimed Daniel killed his friends in a fit of rage, possibly over the girl both he and Mike liked. Others said he left them behind to save himself, then fabricated a ghost story about footsteps and screams to cover his cowardice. For Mike's father, Harold Lawson, this was the only explanation that made sense. He publicly accused Daniel of murder, demanding the sheriff arrest him. But without bodies or a crime scene, Holloway's hands were tied. As whispers of jealousy spread, attention shifted to the girl rumored to be at the center of Daniel and Mike's rivalry. Her name was Sarah Whitfield, a local waitress at the diner where the boys often hung out. Sarah was 18, bright-eyed, and kind. She admitted she had spent time with both Mike and Daniel that summer, though she denied there was any romantic tension. They were friends, she insisted in an interview. If they fought, it wasn't about me. But not everyone believed her. Some locals claimed Sarah favored Daniel's quiet steadiness over Mike's bravado, creating an unspoken rift between the two boys. Others swore they'd seen Mike grow jealous, his temper flaring when Daniel walked her home one evening. Still, Sarah had no connection to the cave and no motive to want Mike or Ethan harmed. To the sheriff, she was a distraction, one of many red herrings in a case already clouded by speculation. As suspicion swirled, another name emerged in hushed conversations: Harold Lawson, Mike's father. Harold was known for his temper. A former coal miner with calloused hands and a voice that carried, he had a reputation for settling disputes with fists. Some said he blamed Daniel so fiercely because he couldn't face his own guilt. After all, he had often pushed Mike to be a man, to take risks, to prove himself. Others went further, suggesting Harold might have followed the boys to the cave that night, furious over some private matter, and confronted them in a rage. No evidence supported this theory, of course. Harold denied it outright, insisting he'd been at home with his wife. But the suspicion lingered. In small towns, grief and anger can turn a man into both victim and villain in the eyes of his neighbors. One particularly persistent rumor involved a stranger spotted in the area days before the disappearance. Several locals reported seeing an unfamiliar man near the valley, a drifter, unshaven, carrying a worn backpack. He was described as tall, with hollow cheeks and a piercing stare. Some said he asked for directions to the caves. Others claimed he muttered about things hidden underground. When the boys vanished, the stranger became an easy target for suspicion. But when police tried to track him down, he was gone. No name, no records, just another ghost story in a case already brimming with them. As weeks turned into months, the story took a darker, more fantastical turn. Whispers spread of strange gatherings in the woods, of candlelight seen flickering near the valley at night. Some swore the markings on the cave walls weren't natural at all, but evidence of ritual activity. A few even claimed Kentucky had long been home to secret societies, groups who believed caves were gateways to other realms. The boys, according to these tales, had stumbled into something they weren't supposed to see. Of course, no tangible proof ever surfaced. Yet the rumor persisted, fueled by fear and the eerie symbols investigators photographed but never explained. Then came another theory, one that struck closer to home. Ethan Cole, the youngest of the three, had been fascinated by caves and folklore for years. Friends said he spoke often about things that lived underground, drawing from obscure books and legends. Could it be that Ethan led them deeper than they intended, chasing a discovery of his own? Some speculated Ethan might have staged something, leaving markings on the walls, creating fear, testing his friend's courage. Perhaps he got lost in the process. Perhaps Mike tried to save him, and both perished in the attempt. But without Ethan's voice, it was impossible to know. By the fall of 1975, the case had devolved into whispers and theories. Every corner of town had its version of the truth. Some swore Daniel was a murderer. Others believed in cults or curses. Still others clung to the idea of a tragic accident. Sheriff Holloway, frustrated by the lack of progress, closed the file as presumed accidental deaths. Officially, the case was over. Unofficially, it was only getting started. Because beneath all the speculation, something didn't add up. 3 boys went into that cave. 2 never returned. And the survivors' haunted eyes hinted at a truth far stranger and far more terrifying than anyone dared to imagine. And soon, that truth would begin to surface. For months, the town of Mill Creek lived in uneasy silence. The case was closed, the cave sealed, but the whispers refused to die. People avoided the valley, yet every so often, someone claimed they saw strange lights flickering near the hillside at night. Others swore they heard faint cries echoing across the fields when the wind was right. Most dismissed it as imagination or grief playing tricks. But then, in the fall of 1976, more than a year after the disappearance, a discovery shattered everything. It began with a hunter. Thomas Avery was a lifelong local, a man who knew the woods like the back of his hand. One morning, while tracking deer, he strayed near the old cave site. The entrance was still sealed with heavy iron bars, rust already creeping across the metal. Yet as he paused nearby, something caught his attention, a glint of light half buried in the dirt along the hillside. Curious, he knelt down and brushed away the soil. What he uncovered froze him in place. It was a flashlight. Not just any flashlight, but one engraved faintly with initials. M.L. Michael Lawson. The casing was dented, the glass cracked, but when Thomas shook it, he swore he heard something rattling inside. He brought it to Sheriff Holloway, who carefully pried it open. Inside was a slip of paper, folded so tightly it seemed impossible it had been crammed in there by accident. The note was short, faded, words scrawled in Ethan Cole's handwriting. "It's not a cave. Don't follow." The sheriff sat in silence, staring at the message. He had seen strange things in his career, but nothing like this. If the note was genuine, and Ethan's parents confirmed it was his writing, it meant at least one of the boys had been alive long enough to leave a warning. But the words themselves raised even more terrifying questions. What did Ethan mean by not a cave? And who, or what, was he telling not to follow? The discovery reignited the case. Forensic experts examined the flashlight, but found no fingerprints, no blood, nothing useful beyond the note itself. Still, the implications were enough to shake the community. Had the boys stumbled into something more than just a cave system? A hidden structure? A man-made labyrinth? Or was Ethan hinting at something far darker? Something that defied explanation? For Daniel Harper, the lone survivor, the news was unbearable. When Sheriff Holloway showed him the note, Daniel broke down. He whispered through tears, I told you it wasn't just us down there." But when pressed to explain what he meant, he clammed up, retreating into silence. The town was split again. Some said the note proved Daniel's innocence, that the boys had encountered something beyond human. Others argued the opposite, claiming Daniel planted the flashlight himself to shift suspicion. But beneath the arguments, one truth gnawed at everyone. Ethan's last message wasn't just a warning. It was a clue that suggested the cave was not what it seemed. For Sheriff Holloway, it was the first crack in the official narrative. The case he thought was buried had just clawed its way back into the light, and the darkness beneath Mill Creek was beginning to stir again. The flashlight and Ethan's chilling note changed everything. For the sheriff, for the families, for the entire community. What had been written off as a tragic accident was now impossible to ignore. If Ethan had left a warning, then at least two of the boys had survived longer than anyone thought. And if his words were to be believed, it's not a cave. Don't follow. Then the story of Mill Creek had only just begun. Sheriff Holloway was reluctant at first. The case had nearly broken in the year before, dragging the county through weeks of dead ends and restless nights. But the flashlight forced his hand. With the families demanding answers, he quietly reopened the investigation in early 1977. This time, he brought in outside help. Geologists, cavers, even an archaeologist from the University of Kentucky. The goal was simple: figure out what Ethan might have meant. When experts examined the cave system, they confirmed something unusual. The first chamber, the same one where the strange markings were found, didn't match the geological makeup of the surrounding limestone. The walls were smoother in places, almost unnaturally so, as if they had been shaped or altered. And the symbols? None of the experts could match them to known graffiti, mining marks, or natural patterns. One geologist described the site bluntly. It doesn't look entirely natural. That phrase echoed eerily close to Ethan's note. Meanwhile, Daniel Harper lived in torment. By 1977, he was barely functioning, avoiding people, rarely speaking, plagued by nightmares. But when Sheriff Holloway asked him to return to the cave with investigators, Daniel hesitated and then agreed. The walk back to the site was agonizing. Locals gathered at a distance, watching in silence as the boy who had once been branded a coward approached the cave again. The iron gate was unlocked, and for the first time since the tragedy, Daniel stepped back inside. His hands shook as the flashlight beams swept across the stone walls. He avoided the chamber with the markings, mumbling under his breath. But when the group reached a narrow passage branching to the left, Daniel stopped cold. "This is where I heard them," he whispered. His voice cracked, eyes fixed on the darkness. The screams. The experts pressed him for detail. What had he seen? What had happened? But Daniel broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, refusing to go further. Still, the fact that he had identified a specific passage intrigued investigators. They marked the spot, noting that the side tunnel had never been fully explored during the initial search. Over the next several weeks, cavers focused on that side tunnel. It was treacherous, tight, winding, requiring ropes and crawling. At first, it seemed to dead end into a narrow crevice. But then, after hours of effort, one caver discovered something astonishing: a false wall. Behind a thin layer of rock, eroded just enough to conceal, lay an opening. A hidden passage, descending deeper into the earth. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Could Mike and Ethan have gone this way? If so, what had they found? The team pressed on. The hidden passage opened into a chamber unlike any they'd seen before. The walls were unnaturally smooth, the ceiling unervingly symmetrical. At the center stood a stone formation, almost like a pillar, surrounded by faint carvings. It didn't look like nature's work. It looked built. The archaeologist who examined it later suggested the possibility of ancient human modification, perhaps Native American, perhaps something older. But the style didn't match known records. And the symbols? They were still undecipherable. The discovery fueled speculation across Mill Creek. Some said the boys had stumbled into ruins buried for centuries. Others whispered darker theories, that the cave wasn't just geological, but a gateway to something else entirely. But the most disturbing detail came when investigators found scratches on the pillar, fresh, jagged lines that didn't match the older carvings. They looked frantic, desperate, as though someone had clawed at the stone from inside the chamber. No bodies were found, but the scratches reignited rumors that the boys hadn't died quickly. Perhaps they had been trapped. Perhaps they had been taken. The new evidence tore the families further apart. Ethan's parents clung to the belief that their son had tried to warn others, that he had discovered something extraordinary but hadn't lived to tell it. Mike's father, however, doubled down on his accusations. To him, the carvings and hidden passages were distractions. He remained convinced Daniel had killed the boys and left the cave to take the blame. Daniel, meanwhile, sank deeper into isolation. When word spread about the hidden chamber, he refused to comment, but his expression told enough. Neighbors described him staring at the horizon for hours, as if haunted by something only he could see. By the spring of 1977, Sheriff Holloway filed a confidential update to the case. In it, he admitted the cave contained features not fully understood and that human modification cannot be ruled out. Yet, without remains, he could not reopen the case formally as a homicide. The report was buried, the chamber sealed again. The town returned to whispers and speculation. But the story didn't die. If anything, it grew darker, because just when the town thought it had reached the limits of the mystery, another discovery would turn the case on its head once more. And this time, the truth would be harder to ignore. The final breakthrough came not from science, not from evidence, but from the survivor himself, Thomas. After years of silence, after decades of carrying the weight of his secret, Thomas finally agreed to sit down with a local journalist in the early 2000s. His hand shook as he spoke. His voice cracked. But for the first time in nearly 3 decades, he revealed what really happened inside that cave. According to Thomas, the arguments among the 3 friends weren't about treasure or glory. They were about fear. He described the cave as if it were alive. He said the air grew heavier the deeper they went, as though something was pushing against them. They felt watched, not by an animal, not by a human, but by something else entirely. The tension broke when one of the friends, David, panicked. Thomas recalled how David dropped his flashlight and screamed that they needed to get out. But Mark, the more daring of the 3, refused to turn back. He taunted David, accusing him of being weak. The argument escalated into a fight. Then the lights. Thomas swore he saw flickering orbs appear in the darkness. Not reflections, not fireflies, something unnatural. He remembered a low humming sound, vibrations rattling through the stone. The moment David ran toward the entrance, something pulled him back, so suddenly, so violently, that his scream was cut off mid-breath. Mark shouted for him, but in seconds he too was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Thomas froze. He didn't see bodies. He didn't hear footsteps, only silence. And then, something breathing behind him. He ran. He didn't look back. He didn't stop until daylight hit his face. And that was the last time he ever saw his friends. The journalist pressed him. Did he kill them? Did he abandon them in panic? Or was he truly claiming that something inside the cave took them? Thomas only gave one final line before ending the interview. The cave didn't want us there, and it only let one of us out. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. Some dismissed it as the ramblings of a guilty man trying to mask his crime. Others believed him and claimed the government sealed the cave not to protect explorers from danger, but to keep whatever lurked inside from ever coming out. For decades, people have tried to solve the riddle. Was it murder? Madness? Or an encounter with something beyond human comprehension? What we know is this. 3 boys entered a cave in 1975. Only one returned, and his story is darker than anyone could have imagined. Today, the cave remains sealed, its entrance covered with heavy slabs of concrete, rusting warning signs bolted into the stone. Locals avoid it. Hikers pass it in silence. And every so often, someone leaves flowers near the barrier. 2 bouquets, always 2 for the boys who never came home. Thomas never returned to that spot. He lived the rest of his life quietly, never recanting his final version of events. When pressed in later years, he simply repeated the same haunting line. It wasn't supposed to let me go. The case remains unsolved. No bones, no belongings, no hard evidence of foul play. Just a survivor whose words straddle the line between guilt and the supernatural. Some insist he murdered his friends in panic and fabricated the rest. Others argue that his trembling voice and haunted eyes were proof he had seen something no human should ever see. And then there are the locals, those who whisper about strange lights flickering near the hills on moonless nights, about odd humming sounds carried by the wind, about the land itself rejecting intruders. The truth lies buried in that cave, but the entrance will never open again, which leaves us with only questions. Were David and Mark victims of human violence or something far stranger? Was Thomas a liar or a man cursed to live with the knowledge of a force beyond our understanding? And most unsettling of all, if the cave really chose to let only one of them out, why him? Why Thomas? And what would have happened if it had chosen differently? This is the mystery of 3 friends who entered a cave in 1975, and only one came back. And some say the cave is still waiting.